Morning, everyone.
Good morning,
Good morning,
Rabbi.
Rabbi.
Chodesh Tov Agat Chodesh. We are learning Mishnayos Eruvin, Parakeh, Chapter 5, Mishnah Vav, Mishnah 6. Now, this Mishnah is going to kind of digress from what we're discussing until now. Because now the discussion is not going to be Eruv Tchumen, which we're discussing until now, but this Mishnah is going to be focusing on what's called Shitufei Mevuos. Now, we've mentioned many times already previously that there is a rabbinic law that even if you live in a courtyard, a chutzner that has four walls around it, if there are two houses or more open to the courtyard, you have to make an Eruv Chatzeres in order to carry from the house to the courtyard or the courtyard to the house, which is that everybody in the courtyard, they give some food, they put the food in one house, that now combines everyone. The same thing, now to extend it a little bit further, the same thing applies if, let's say, a number of courtyards open to an alleyway, and the alleyway leads to the public domain. And you want to carry from the courtyards into the alleyway, you have to what's called shitufa mevuos, the combination of the alleyways, in which all the members of the courtyards, donate food. It's put into one courtyard, and now everybody from all the courtyards can carry into the alleyway, and from the alleyway into the courtyards. That is the focus of today's Mishnah. Now, today's Mishnah is going to be dealing with, starting off with the following halacha. And that is that if you were to have, there are situations where you can make one shitufei mevuos for the whole city. There are situations like that. And according to actually halacha would have said that if I have a certain situation in a city, basically, as we'll see in the Mishnah, you have a walled city, and the city is owned by one person. So the halacha. Let me read it to you here. In theory, all this. Let me back up. In theory, all the streets in a properly enclosed city, for example, a city with a wall around it, can be joined in one shitufei mevuos, which would permit carrying anywhere in the city. It's got one wall around it. It's one thing. One shitufei mevuos could cover the entire city. Okay. Now, however, the rabbis were concerned that people seeing this might think that it's permitted to carry even in a public domain. That's understandable, right? Mm-hmm. The rabbis therefore decreed that any city whose streets might be confused with the public domain must leave some part of the city out of its shitufei mevuos in order that can be forbidden in some part of the city. So therefore, in that kind of situation, the Chachamim said, you have to leave out some part that could have been included. You leave it out. That now becomes the reminder to people to see that there is such a thing as carrying in a street on Shabbos, even though we're all doing that right now because of the shitufei mevuos that we made. Nonetheless, they know that there's an area that you can't carry. That reminds them there's such a thing as a public domain you can't carry in. Now we had the Mishna to talk about what are those circumstances. But the point is that in theory, an entire walled city could have been included in just one shitufei mevuos for the whole city. The Chachamim said we have a problem in certain circumstances with that because people are going to think you carry in the street regularly, even in a public domain. So therefore, they instituted that in these kinds of situations, you've got to leave something out of the shitufei mevuos where you cannot carry, so that people realize there's such a thing as not carrying in a public domain. Now, what are the circumstances for this? So the Mishnah reads, Ir shel yachid, a city owned by one person, owns the whole city, every house, every street, he owns the whole place. And he rents out all the other houses there, doesn't keep for himself, he rents them out to people. Okay? V'nasa shel rabim, and then it became a public city, which means he sold off the houses to people. So now everybody owns their own house. There are many homeowners. Ma'arvin eskula. You can make one erev for the whole place without leaving out anybody. Now, why is that? So the point is like this. In a walled city owned by one person, none of the streets can be considered a reshus harabim, public domain. Even if they were used by many people or open on both sides and are 16 amos wide. This is the rule. Just accept that right now. A walled city owned by one person, none of the streets, no matter how many people are there, how wide they are, all the other conditions that would make a street a public domain, in a walled city owned by one person, they are not public domains. and therefore carry to your heart's content. And now the thing is, and since people do not think of its streets as a Rishus Harabim, there's no reason to stop her from making one shitta for all of it. People apparently understand this. They realize this. This is all owned by Mr. Big, right? And at that point of time, they understand there's no public domains here, and there's no confusion with anything else. Now, such a city keeps its status even if its houses are later sold to many people. Okay? He doesn't own all the houses anymore. Mm-hmm. Now it's the public. There are many people who own the houses. Now, maybe things should change now because many people own the houses. People start thinking it's a public domain. The answer is no. Such a city keeps its status even if its houses are later sold to many people. This is so provided the original owner still has some rights in it, such as ownership of its streets, which causes people to continue to think of it as a private city. Meaning, even though now there are many people who own houses, but Mr. Big still owns the streets, so they still see things the way they were. It didn't change. This is just one big private area, and no one's going to confuse it with other public areas. You don't have one sheet of covers everyone.
Like a gated community.
Yeah, one sheet of covers everyone. And the point is that halachically, the streets really aren't a public domain. Is there a question of people thinking that they look like a public domain, and that'll make them think you can carry the public domain? Not under these circumstances when the city started off as a private city. However, the Mishna continues, V'shal Rabim, V'nasa Shal Yachid. Now, let's say it used to be a city of many, meaning people owned their houses. The streets were public. V'nasa Shal Yachid. And then it became a private city. Everybody sold their houses to one guy. He owns all the houses now, and everybody rents from him. Then, ein ma'ar b'neskula. You cannot make one erev. You cannot make one shetufa mevuos. The word here, erev and shetufa mevuos, are interchangeable. You cannot go ahead and now make one for the whole city. Because again, it started as a public city. It was a public domain. Now the question is, its status should change because it belongs to one person. The answer is, if you're going to change the status, people are going to think you can carry it in public domain because they still see the city as a public domain. That's how it started off. Okay? So what do you got to do? Is there still a way of making one shivim mevois for everyone? The answer is, Elim kain asa chutzala, unless he leaves out someone or some part from this shivim mevois, ke chadasha should be Yehuda, like the city called Chadasha in Yehuda, in Judea. In the area of Yehuda of Israel, there was a city called Chadasha. It was a very small city. It was a little town, 50 people. That was it. Now, this town of Chadasha was next to a bigger city. Doesn't say what the name of that city was. That city was able to make one shetufa mevuos for the whole city because they left out the city next door, Chadasha. There is a city, this big city, and it was owned by the rabbin. It was owned by public. It was owned by many. It was a public city, okay, and it wanted to make one shetufa mevuos for the whole city because again, there's a wall around it. Now it gets a public. It's a public area, but they wanted to make a shetufa mevuos. Yeah, but it's a walled city, so really it's a private area according to the halacha. But many people owned it, so you can't make one for the whole city. But what happened was this one city had a smaller city next door to it called Chadasha. And when they made that one shitufei mevuos for the whole city, they could have included Chadasha, but they left them out. And by doing that, they now made it that their one erev for the whole big city is acceptable. Because since Chadasha nearby, they can't carry into, they understand that there's such a thing called a public area that you can't carry in. Mm-hmm. So too, let's say you don't have that situation, right? You don't have a city next door to you, but this one city, that's one walled city, wants to make one shetufa mevuos for the whole city. They got to leave out some part of the city, and that part of the city has to be the same size as Chadasha. You got to leave out 50 people. Got to be one section of the city of 50 people. They are not including the shetufa mevuos. Can't carry there. Once you can't carry there, then one shetufa mevuos is okay for the whole city because the people realize that there's a public area that you can't carry in. Okay?
And this is on purpose.
Yes. Diva Rabbi Yehuda, these are the words of Rabbi Yehuda. Reb Shimon Oimer, Reb Shimon says, you don't got to go so far. You're not going to do 50 people. Shalosh Chatzeres Shal Shnei Batim. 3 courtyards of 2 houses. That's it. If you leave out 3 courtyards of 2 houses, that's enough that's enough you left out, that now you have your hecker, your reminder to people, for the people should see there's such a thing as a public area that you can't carry in, because again, this is part of the city, right? You can't carry in here, and they realize such a thing as not carrying, and that helps them realize such a thing as not carrying in a public area. Bibar Tanur brings down that the halacha is that even 1 house and 1 courtyard, that's enough. Just leave that 1 courtyard, even if it just has 1 house, you leave that out of the Shtupim Mavuos. Again, that's enough for people to realize there's such a thing called the public area that you can carry in, and they won't make a mistake to carry in what would really be a Rosh Hashanah, a public domain. Have a wonderful day. Good Chodesh.
Thank you, Rabbi.